Today's daf, Be'ezras Hashem, is Masechta Chullin Daf Kuf Aleph 101, and we will start from Daf Kuf Amid Beis, 2 lines from the bottom. 2 lines from the bottom. So let us read the Gemara. The Gemara begins like this: Kufa, we learned in a previous teaching yesterday. Ha'oichel gid hanasha shel behema tmeya, person who eats the gid hanasha of a non-kosher animal. So you should have 2 problems over here. Yehuda mechayev shtayim. Rabbi Yehuda says you chayev twice, one for gid hanasha and one for eating a non-kosher animal. Or Rab Shimon poita. We go to Amid Aleph. Rab Shimon says you're exempt, not even for. It's the best of both worlds. You don't get gid hanasha, and it's not. You don't get an avera for eating non-kosher. So the Gemara says Rab Shimon manavshach. Let's understand Rab Shimon. That makes no sense. If you can say that one transgression takes effect where one exists, in other words, what first came? The first came the meat, right? And then the gid hanasha, because the first a person develops. When a person develops, he develops first his meat, and then you develop your gid. So l'chayev nami mishim gid. Then you should also be liable for gid hanasha. We just began with explaining the opinion of Rabbi Shimon on top of Kuf Aleph Amid Aleph. Rabbi Shimon says that if you eat the gid hanasha of a non-kosher animal, take a non-kosher animal, the gid hanasha of a pig. So if you eat the gid hanasha of a non-kosher animal, you're exempt from everything. So the Gemara doesn't understand. What do you mean? If you can say 2 isurim could take effect, 1 isur could take effect where one already exists, l'chayev nami mishum gid, then you should be liable for gid hanasha. First, it's a non-kosher animal, and then you have the isur of gid hanasha. He ain't isur chalal isur, but if you're going to say that there is no isur could take effect when they're already a pre-existing isur, so l'chayev mishum tuma dekadem, then you should be liable because it's non-kosher. And so why did Rav Shimon say you're totally potter? So we ain't begidim b'noisen tam. If Rabbi Shimon holds a gid hanasha has no taste, and if it has no taste, you can't be liable for eating non-kosher. It's not like a piece of meat which has taste. It has no taste. So the gid hanasha in itself should be rendered that if you eat it as if you're not eating non-kosher. It's not like you're eating non-kosher, but l'chayev mishum gid, but you should be liable because you're eating the gid hanasha. So why does Rav Shimon totally say you're exempt? Amar Rava explained, lo ilam ksava ein begidim b'noisen tam. Rabbi Shimon holds gid hanasha has no taste. And technically, just like a kosher animal, you're chayev if you eat the gid hanasha. So a person should be liable if you eat the gid hanasha of a non-kosher animal. But for Shana Hosam of it's there is different, because Rabbi Shimon has a pasuk that tells us the gid hanasha does not apply by a non-kosher animal. Amakra, because the pasuk says al kein lo yochlu b'nei Yisrael as gid hanasha, that for this reason the Jewish people should not eat the gid hanasha only because it's the only nerve or sinu that was moved out of place, but the rest of the animal you could eat. So the Torah tells you in a like hinting manner, mishigida aser, it only applies by an animal where the gid hanasha would be aser, ubsare mutter, but the rest of the flesh would be mutter. That's when the gid hanasha is aser. Yatzis zu, but excluding from this iser is a non-kosher animal, shegida aser, where the gid is aser, upsare aser as well, and the basar is aser as well. So because you can't eat the rest of the animal, so therefore the gid hanasha is not aser, and so therefore Rabbi Yehuda has a pasuk. Rabbi Shimon has a pasuk. The gid hanasha of a non-kosher animal is doesn't apply. Amar Rava Yehuda Amar Rav. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav, ha'oichel gid hanasha shel nevela. I guess he's quoting a brisa. Brisa says that if you eat a gid hanasha of a nevela. Now here is interesting. You have a kosher animal, a kosher cow, right? So when it's alive, the only part of the animal that you can't eat is the gid hanasha. When it now suddenly died, right? And it didn't get a shchita, so then the entire animal becomes aser. So that's called an iser koilo. Let's just see in this picture, the green over here is an iser koilo. The animal had a little iser on it, and now that it became, because of gida nasha, now that it became an avela, the whole animal becomes aser. So it added to that. So comes along, Rabbi Meir says, mechayev shtayim, because if you have an iser koilo, you're liable for two. One, because it's the gida nasha. If you eat the gida nasha, and plus the gida nasha is part of an avela animal, so you get two averas. The Chachamim says, "Ein chayev ela achas." You only chayev one. So, and this is the rest of the daf is trying to figure out who this Chachamim is. It's going to tell you that it's Rabbi Yossi Aglili, because the Chachamim hold it's usher first as gida nasha. You can't tell me that an avela, even though it's a wider isser, will take effect on the iser of gida nasha. Umaydim chacham Rameir. The chachamim would agree to Rameir, says Rabbi Yehuda Marav. Ba'oichel gid hanasha shel oila v'shel shar niska. If this is a gida nasha of a carbon oila or of a shar haniska, a cow that you're supposed to stone, so it's aser bahana. So now the second iser that came upon this animal is its kachim, or it was a shar haniska. That's called an Isser Moisif, because as you can see in the blue over here, the Isser, the new Isser added an Isser Hanoah that you're not allowed to benefit from it. Till now it was also to eat from the animal, the Gida Nasha, and now you're not allowed to even benefit from this Gida Nasha. So that's called an Isser Moisif. So once there's an Isser Moisif, Shechayev Shtayim, you'll be Chayev liable for two. Let's say one for eating the gida nasha, and one because you're eating the gida nasha of a shara niskal. You're not supposed to benefit from it. So Montana, who is going to be the author of this brisa, the Issa Koil is Chala Issa Leslie, that the author of the brisa holds that this Chachamim hold there is no such a thing of Issa Chalal Issa, even if the second Isser is a wider Isser, because Chachamim hold, but when the Gida Nasha was from an Avela, which is the Avela came second, and it's a wider Isser, it doesn't take effect because it's also because of Gida Nasha. But if the second Isser is Chomer, Isser Koila Isser Chomer, if the second Isser is a more stricter Isser, like it has another dimension to it, where it becomes Osir Bahanoah Islay, then you'll say the second Isser will Chal. So who is that? Who is the Chachamim? The question is, who is the Chachamim? You don't hold of Isser Chal al Isser, even if this second Isser is Isser Koilel, okay? But if you go really, if it's a much more, has another dimension to it, if the second Isser is like an Isser Hanoah, and the first Isser is Isser Achila, you will say Issa Chalal Issa. Who would be that opinion? Rabbi Yossi Aglili. We're going to see it's Rabbi Yossi Aglili. And all you're going to see from this brisa is Rabbi Yossi Aglili does not hold of Isser Chal al Isser when it's Isser Koilo. That's all you're going to see. But we're going to say he only said it by an Isser Koilo. A wider Isser would not be Chal on an Isser. But if Isser Chomer, he will say. Now, what's this author of brisa? So there's a halacha that if an animal is hegdish, you're not allowed to eat. You're not allowed to eat hegdish when you're tamei, right? If you're tamei and the piece of meat is hegdish, if you eat it by mistake, let's say you chayv a korban chatas on purpose, you have to give chorus. Let's say the meat is tamei and you're tahar, then it's only asur. It's only asur alav. Okay, that's all you need to know. So now we learned in the Mishnah, Tamei, you have a Tamei person, Sha'achal Kodesh, that ate kachim, Bein Kodesh Tamei, Bein Kodesh Tar, whether the kachim was Tamei or whether the kachim is Tar, Chayev. You Chayev a korban chatas because you're Tamei, right? You're Tamei, and you eat kachim. Doesn't matter what the meat is, if it's Tamei or Tar, you'll chayev a chatas, because as soon as you're going to touch it, you're going to make it tamei, right? So therefore you chayev a korban chatas because you're tamei. If a tamei ate tahar meat, then he is liable. But if a tame ate kosher meat that was tame, he's not liable. You don't get karash because he only ate a piece of meat that was tame, and therefore, if the meat is just tame, there is no chiyuv karas. But wait a second, you're a tame. Your body is a tame. Why is there is a chiyuv karas and you should be chayiv katas? And the second thing is omerloi. The chachamim say af tame she'achal esatar kivin shena gabai tim uhuhu. Even a regular case where a person is really tame, and he ate the kachim that's tar, as soon as he lifted it up to his mouth, he was matama the kachim anyway. And you chayiv chatas. You agree with me, Rabbi Yossi? So shape kamelei rabbana amrlei rabbana Rabbi Yossi. The rabbis told Rabbi Yossi very well. So what is the machlekes all about? Amar Rava. Rava said, "Benitma haguf va'achakach nitma abasar kuliyamaloi prigi dechayev." The isa kores kadem. So let's take a picture. You have your body is tummy. He's red. You see the man in the screen is red. Now, if you're first tame and the meat is tahar, here it's green meat, right? It's tahar meat. So then everybody agrees that there's a carbon chatas over here. You're not allowed to eat this, and that the kosher meat is tahar. He's a tame, even if he's going to be tame the meat by lifting it up to his mouth. But at the end of the day, he's a tame. He should be chai. If he does it by mistake, he gets a carbon chatas. He doesn't get, and eventually he's going to make this tahar meat tame, because by lifting it up, he's making it tar. So that everybody agrees, yichayev a carbon katas. Ki pligi. When does Rabbi Yossi argue in the Rabbanim? Benitma basar va'achachach nitma guf. First, the basar became tame, and then his body became tame. Rabbanim islay is a koilo. The migoy the mechayev achatikas taharis, the alma mechayev name achatikas tameya. Rabbanim say that since if the basar was tame first, and then the person became tame, so that is called an isak mois isak koilo, which has a wider restrictions, because once you become tame, it's not just this piece of meat you can't eat, it's every piece of meat you can eat. So since you're chayiv on other tar meats, so you're chayiv on this tame meat. Rabbi Yossi Aglili less le isak koilo. The migoy lo yamrinam. Rabbi Yossi Aglili doesn't hold a wider iser koilo will fall upon a iser that already exists. So therefore, the iser of tame, although it's wider, it extends to even tahar meats. When your body becomes tame, the iser extends to other tahar meats. It will not take effect on this piece of meat. Let's see it in a picture form. You have this guy who is tahar, and then the meat was tame, right? But now, of course, if he would eat it, you're not chayiv a carbon chatas. If he remains tar, of course, you're not chayiv a chatas. The question was, if he became tame, now that he became tame, Rabbanan say that since when he became tame, this was an iser koilo, because now this guy can't eat tar meats. So this tame meat, since it's migoy, it's chal on other tar meat, the new avera is chal on this tame, the previously tame meat. That's what Rabbanan hold. But Rabbi Yossi Aglili holds, no, we don't say issa koilel if we don't say issa chal al issa, because this was also already from before. This was also already prior to him becoming tame. So this was also from before. We're not going to say issa koilel, that just because he became tame, a new isser is chal on this piece of meat, and therefore you're not chayiv a carbon chatas for eating this previously tame meat. Says the Gemara, but why wouldn't the Gemara is going to ask now? But when he became tame, that's an isser moisef, because now when he eats, but if he didn't become tame, if he would eat that that tame meat, he would only be chayiv a lav. But now that he became tame, he gets kares. So even Rabbi Yossi Aglili should agree that isachal al isa. That's Gemara's question. Rabbi Yossi Aglili, lesle isakailo, the migil lo yamrinim. Rabbi Yossi Aglili, so the Gemara says, okay, he doesn't have Issa Koilo, so therefore the second Issa doesn't come on this piece of meat. But nevertheless, Rabbi Yosef Galili, Nihi the Issa Koilo Lesle, Issa Kal, Yove Issa Chomer, Yocha Issa Kal. When the second Isser is a light Isser, okay, Rabbi Yosef Galili doesn't hold of Ein Isser Chalal Isser. But if the second Isser is more chomerdik, like in this case, when your body becomes more tamei, where there's now an Isser Karas for you to eat kosher meat, so it should chal on that previously tamei meat. So Rabbi Yosef Galili would agree, should agree, that you should be chayev for chatas for eating that meat once you become tamei. What's more chomerdik? Tumas aguf, sharei tumas aguf b'karis. Tumas aguf is much more stronger because you get karis for that. Ravashi, so Ravashi explained, man leimelam the tumas aguf chamura, dilma tumas basa chamura, the less late tahar b'mikvah. You see, true tumas aguf may be chomerdik because the man gets karis if he eats kosher meat, but he could go to the mikvah and become tar. Once a piece of meat becomes tamei, a kosher piece of meat becomes tamei, there's no tahara b'mikvah. So when the meat itself is tamei, that's also a chumradik. So they're both considered as equal. They're both considered equal. Tumas aguf is chomer because it gets karis, as you can see on the screen, but it's kuladik because you could go to the mikvah. Tumas abasar is kuladik. You only get a lav, but it's chumradik because you can never tahar it. You can never have it tahar. So it's equal. So therefore, the tumas haguf cannot be chal if there was a pre-existing tumas abasa. Says the Gemara, we go to Amud Beis. Rabbi Yosef Glili, Leslie is the kailo. Rabbi Yosef Glili, you're telling me he doesn't hold of Issa kailo. Only if the second Isser is not a wider Isser, but it's a chumradik Isser. But if the second Isser is not a wider Isser, so then it wouldn't be chal. So then, Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, Shabbos for Yom Kippur. Shabbos and Yom Kippur that fall out on the same day. The same day, Shabbos and Yom Kippur. Okay, so now when you look at Shabbos and you look at Yom Kippur, they're both they both have strict stringencies. Shabbos, of course, you get Mises Bezdin, whereas Yom Kippur there's Karas, but Yom Kippur is like a more expanded Isser because you're not allowed to do malacha like on Shabbos, but you're also not allowed to eat, you're not allowed to put on shoes, etc. So Yom Kippur is more expanded type of Isser. So when they fall on the same time, if you did a malacha by mistake, how do you know you chayev two chatoyes? If let's say you did malacha, so it's also to do malacha on Shabbos, also to do malacha Yom Kippur, you chayev two karmen chatases. Talmud loima Shabbos he Yom Kippurim hu divrei Rabbi Yosef Galili. Rabbi Yosef Galili holds that if the pasuk says Shabbos he Yom Kippurim he, the Torah says you don't move from the other. Each one is distinct, despite that they fall at the same day. So if Rabbi Yosef Galili, because he holds that they would, the question is, if it's only because Rabbi Yosef Galili holds that if one could fall on the other, Shabbos is more strict than Yom Kippur, and Yom Kippur is more strict than Shabbos in certain ways. So because they're different, when they fall at the same time, you chayev twice. That's only because he must hold that an Isser koilel, an Isser, a wider Isser, an Isser koilel, would be chal on a pre-existing Isser. Like the Isser of Yom Kippur, which is a wider Isser, could be chal on the Isser of Shabbos. And so we see that Rabbi Yosef Galili holds of Isser koilel. Rabbi Kiva, you only chayev one. So how do you resolve that? Here, from this brisa, it proves Rabbi Yosef Galili holds that Isser would chal on this will fall on, or would be able to fall on a pre-existing Isser if the second Isser is a koilel. That Yom Kippur could fall on Shabbos, even though it's a wider type of Isser. That's what Rabbi Yosef Galili must hold from this brisa. And you told me he doesn't hold of such a thing, only if the second Isser is more chomerdik than the first Isser. Answers the Gemara, Shalach Ravim, yes, it was written in the Mishnah this way, but you got to turn the Mishnah around. That Rabbi Yosef Galili, as you can see in the picture, He says, Rabbi Kiva says, Chayiv al zeh atzmai, v'zeh atzmai. Rabbi Yossi HaGlili says, Chayiv only one. Okay. So now, when Shabbos and Yom Kippur fall out at the same time, Rabbi Kiva says, Rabbi Yossi HaGlili now says, Chayiv only one. What is it? Is it Shabbos or is it Yom Kippur? What's more stronger? Shalach Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yankov Bar Giyori Mishum Rabbi Yochanan. Another statement from a statement from Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yossi HaGlili man de'apkom. According to the way you explained Rabbi Yossi HaGlili, that you turned it around. Shogag b'Shabbos, Shabbos and Yom Kippur fall out at the same time. So you made a mistake at Shabbos and you amazed it on Yom Kippur. So what is it? Are you chayev a korban chatas? So chayev a korban chatas. You knew it's Yom Kippur, but you forgot at Shabbos. So you chayev a korban chatas, and of course you get kares because you were mazed doing malach on Yom Kippur. But what happens? Hizid b'Shabbos, you mazed did on Shabbos, the shaga b'Yom Kippurim, and you did a mistake on Yom Kippur. So of course you're not going to get a chatas because you did it on purpose on Shabbos, but the chayra you should get a chatas because it's Yom Kippur. Potter, it's Potter. So we view it more strongly as a Shabbos. So the question is why? My tama. Amar Abaya said, Shabbos kviva kaimim. Really, Shabbos pre-existed this Yom Kippur. Because Shabbos, I can tell you without the calendar when it's going to be Shabbos. It's the seventh day. Yom Kippurim was only decided, let's say a month ago, by Rosh Hashanah, when Bezdin decided when to make Rosh Chodesh, when to make Rosh Hashanah. So Beidina did kavalei. Bezdin was kaveya it. So since the idea that it was known as Shabbos first, and then it became known as Yom Kippur, that's why Shabbos takes precedence. So if you did amazing, if you on that day, Shabbos and Yom Kippur at the same time, and you've amazed or over on Chilcha Shabbos and by mistake you did Yom Kippur, you're not going to bring a korban chatas for Yom Kippur. We're not going to view it as if it's Yom Kippur, so to speak. Amalei Rava Saif Tavai Bahada Didadodikasi. But at the end of the day, it's still Yom Kippur, and they fall at the same time. When it comes Saturday, it's both Shabbos and Yom Kippur. They both happen at the same time. So how could it be that if you shogag b'Shabbos, Yom Kippurim, I'm sorry, Hizid b'Shabbos, v'shogag b'Yom Kippurim. The second case, by this case, if Hizid b'Shabbos and shogag b'Yom Kippurim, you're not going to bring a korban chatas. Why not? You're doing a mistake and a veira on Yom Kippur by mistake. Rava says this was a unique case. It really wasn't Yom Kippur. Shma dahada. That statement of Rabbi Yochanan was talking about a time of shmad. They were converting Jews, and therefore they asked the Jewish people to fast on Yom Kippur and ignore Yom Kippur. So in order not to forget that there was once a Yom Kippur, so they made people to make pretend that it's Yom Kippur. That Shabbos, they made pretend that it's Yom Kippur. So not really Yom Kippur. And therefore, you can't be chayav a korban chatas. For Shalchim Itam, they sent from Eretz Yisrael, the Yom Kippur, the High Shata, the Yom Kippur of that year, Shabsahi. It was really Shabbos. And therefore it was really Shabbos, but it was never really Yom Kippur. So that's why you're not going to be chayiv Yom Kippur, or you're not going to be chayiv if on that particular Shabbos, if you forgot that it was Yom Kippur, because it's a fake Yom Kippur. It's sort of like the Marranos when they had to come up. They didn't want to prove that they are keeping the holidays. So let's take the holiday of Pesach. They wouldn't keep the Seder on the Seder night. They would move it a few nights later because they knew the Goyim wouldn't come. The Inquisition wouldn't come and try to see if they're keeping Seder night if they moved it to another night. And they did it because they didn't want to forget that there was such a concept of Pesach. They were hoping that the Inquisition will blow over and they will have the freedom. So same idea over here. They explained it like Rava, that it was a unique year, that it wasn't really Yom Kippur. Now we learned in the Mishnah, and this will conclude, Rabbi Yehuda said in our Mishnah that on the previous page, that Aver Achai of Aver, that the Gira Nosha applies by a tamei animal. A non-kosher animal has applied the Isra of Gira Nasha because the non Gira Nasha, the Isra of Gira Nasha pre-existed Matan Torah. So there was no such a concept of non-kosher animals, and you also Gid Anasha. So therefore, Gid Anasha applies by non-kosher animals. But Rabbanan hold that no, Gid Anasha was not before Har Sinai, and therefore, first the Torah Hashem gave us the Isra of non-kosher, and once you have the Isra of non-kosher, Ein Isra Chalal Isra. And Rabbi Yehuda says, but then the Chumash says in Parshas Vayishlach that Gid Anasha, you're not supposed to eat Gid Anasha, and that was before Matan Torah. Amr Lo Rabbi Yehuda, so they told Rabbi Yehuda, B'chinema al Kain Lo Yochli B'nei Yaakov. It says, V'lema El B'nei Yisrael. The pasuk says the Jewish people should not eat the Gid Anasha. V'lenikim B'nei Yisrael at Sinai. So, but the Jewish people were not called B'nei Yisrael until after Har Sinai. So we see that even though the Chumash wrote it, the Isser in Parshas Vayishlach, the Isser of Gid Anasha was only given after Har Sinai, and therefore it only applies by a kosher animal, not by a non-kosher animal. Says the Gemara, the Gemara concludes that the Chacham says, it was said by Mount Sinai. The reason why it's written in Parshas Vayishlach, so you should always remember what reason why we are not eating the Gid Anasha. Says the Gemara, Mosav Rava. Rava asked the question. Pasuk says, "Vayisu b'nei Yisrael Yaakov avim." The Bnei Yisrael lifted Yaakov, their father, and brought him to Mitzrayim. Now, this was after where Hashem changed his name to Yisrael. So we see that the Jewish people are called Bnei Yisrael even prior to Har Sinai. And says the Gemara, La Chamaisa. That's true. I agree with that. But that's after the story of the Malach. And that came much later where Hashem called him Bnei Yisrael. So therefore, we're called Bnei Yisrael. So if that's the case, then from that time, when Hashem changed Yaakov's name to Yisrael, from then we should be Asin Gid Anasha, which was prior to Har Sinai. That's the question. Amalei Ravacha b'dei Rava Ravashi. So from that time, we should have been Asin Gid Anasha. Why were we not Asin Gid Anasha until after Har Sinai? Amalei, so Rashi said, the Torah Pa'am Pa'amanin, was Torah given at different times. So the Torah of B'Shas, when Yaakov was fighting with the Malach, he was only called Yaakov, not Yisrael. Therefore, Gid Anasha didn't apply when the fight happened. Hashem changed his name later to Yisrael, but when Hashem changed his name, that was not when he was fighting with the Malach anymore. That's much later. That's not at the time of Har Sinai. So therefore, once it was pushed off from the time of the fight, even though Yaakov was called Yisrael prior to that, the Isra of Gid Anasha only took effect after Har Sinai, and that's why the Chachamim say that because it only takes effect after Har Sinai, it only applies by a kosher animal, because by a non-kosher animal, you have the problem of Ein Isra Chalal Isra. If it's non-kosher already, you can't have the Isra of Gid Anasha applied to a non-kosher animal. So ends the Daf Kuf Aleph. So just to briefly review, we learned about Isra Chalal Isra. If you hold plain Isra Chalal Isra, there's not a problem. But sometimes you could hold that ain't Isra Chalal Isra, but if the second Isra is a wider Isra, like it's Isra Koilel, then you would say Isra Chalal Isra, a wider Isra, like Nevela on Gid Anasha. Kosher animal that became a Nevela, that's Isra Koilel. And then you have an Isser Moisef, where the second Isser adds a strictness to it, or from Skila to Kares, like sometimes you have that, or sometimes it's Isser Chomer, that the second Isser is more stronger. For example, at Asr Bahanoah, if the first it was a kosher animal, and then the second Isser, besides the second Isser, besides extending to the entire animal, let's say becomes a Hegdish. So now it becomes Asr Bahanoah. So there, that's the Gid Hanasha was Asr, but in the second Isser makes it now Asr Bahanoah, the Gid Hanasha. So even according to Rabbi Yossi Hagalili, it could take effect. Then we had a case where a Gid Hanasha of an animal of Tameh, Rabbi Yehuda says Gid Hanasha of a non-kosher animal gets 2 malchus. Rabbi Shimon says it's potter. And the reason is because Gid is considered like a bone. It has no taste. So it's not you don't. It's still you won't get an avera for eating non-kosher, and also the issa is Rabbi Shimon in the beginning of the daf had a pasuk that said Gira Nasha could only be chal on a kosher animal where you can eat the rest of the animal. But if you couldn't have eaten the rest of the animal, then he learned from the pasuk that Gira Nasha would not apply, and therefore Gira Nasha, even if the gid is considered like a bone, would not take effect on a non-kosher animal. Therefore, if you eat the Gira Nasha of a non-kosher animal, according to Reb Shimon, you're potter for absolutely. Okay, we saw the case of Gira Nasha of Nevela, and then we also discuss an Odin Tame. They ate Basa Kodesh that's Tame. Chachamim say Yechayev Kares. Chachamim say Yechayev Kares, and we're dealing with the Basar became Tame first, and then the person became Tame. So the second Gisser is a koilo, because it's chal on other pieces of meats. That's why the Chachamim say, in that case, Yechayev Kares. And if you do it by mistake, you have to bring a katas. Rabbi Yossi Galili says no. It only remains if you even after you became Tame, since this was a previously Tame piece of meat, Rabbi Yossi Galili does not hold Issa Chal Issa even by an Issa Koil. And then we learned Yom Kippurim Shechol Yes B'Shabbos. We had to switch it around. Rabbi Yossi Galili says Yechayev only one carbon chatas, and the question was, if you were shogeg on Yom Kippur, you're still going to be potter from chatos. It was said, and Rava explained that statement that it was a unique case where they kept Shabbos and they made believe that it's Yom Kippur. And because of that, therefore, if someone violated the Shabbos on purpose and forgot it was Yom Kippur, he'll still be potter from chatas because it's not really a carbon chatas. That was one way Rava explained what was going on with that. Okay, we will stop over here. Go follow.